Hey, everybody, it's Devon.
And Kate.
Welcome to Med Crimes.
My phone does this weird thing where sometimes it just listens to our conversations and then writes everything down in a text message.
So it just did that.
So, yes.
You're just texting our intro to Brad.
And it also caught before I hit the record button when it said, "Okay, are you ready to fuck shit up?"
Welcome back, everyone. It's
back.
every other Tuesday.
And this is a special one because first of all, it's a Devonism.
Yay!
Second of all, I heard a rumor that this is the first 2-part Devonism.
Can you believe it?
I could not be more psyched for this.
It's happening.
It is literally happening.
Yeah. Kate's so proud. She's like, sweet, I get a research break.
I'm like, yes, first of all, it gives me a nice break. Second of all, I just feel like I've just given birth to this beautiful little Med Crimes podcasting baby nerd like me.
You talking about me?
Yes.
Oh, am I a newborn?
Yes.
I feel like I'm in the toddler stage.
No, you're definitely like late toddler stage.
Yeah, like pre-K.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
you're like ready for newer,
for growth
bigger things
and expansion.
Yes.
And it's so funny because I was so excited putting this episode together that I remember I said to you, like, hey, Kate, this is where I'm thinking I want to stop. This is what I want to do. I want to branch out with this. You never do that with me because
No.
you're just like, so chill. I got this.
Remember what I told you, though? I was like, girl, this is your episode. Like,
I
you
know.
stop where you want to stop. You do what you want to do
I know.
because you're going to just like know what the right thing to do is because you know the content.
Mama's proud.
Mama is pretty proud right now.
She's so proud. Tell us about our Patreon.
We have Kathy Crape.
Hi, Kathy Crepe.
Hey, Kathy Crape.
Is that Kathy with a K or a C?
Kathy N.K. and Crape with a K. She's
She's a double K.
She's a double K.
Because I was wondering if she was going to be a CC.
No, she's a KK. And we have Taylor Loramore. Hi, Taylor.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I almost thought you were going to say Lautner.
Nope.
And I was going to be like, whoa.
No, we are not on Taylor Lautner's radar.
Hi, Taylor.
Hi, Taylor. We are glad it's you and not Taylor Lautner. Also, your
Yes.
name sounds like a book character, and I love it.
Laura
And then-
Moore.
Last but not least, Rebecca Varden.
Ooh, Rebecca.
Another book character. She sounds like a detective.
Oh.
Yeah.
Da-na-na-na.
Are you on the case?
Hi, Rebecca.
Anyway. You guys are fiery, fearsome phoenixes rising from the
Ooh,
ashes and
nice.
flapping your wings and saying fuck you to everybody that has wronged you
With the fire breath.
with the fiery breath. This is sounding very dragony, but you're actually phoenixes.
I don't
So,
care. It's
okay.
fine.
Anyway, that's what you are. Thank you.
Welcome to the Patronus family.
Yes.
So, the Devonism. We've had this idea since I think the very beginning.
I feel like this is
We've-
so highly anticipated
we've-
because we keep talking about it.
Kate and I always wanting to we keep touching upon and wanting to talk about lobotomies.
Mm.
The lobotomy. Even the name is just like, ugh.
Ew.
So in order to talk about lobotomy, you can't just you have to talk about why. Why did they do them? Which then just broadened me into a whole mental health world. And in every case that you and I do, we always seem to kind of be talking about some kind of mental health issue.
Mhm.
And it's come so far from when they used to do these lobotomies to what we do now that it was like, you know what? It's time to take some time and discuss mental health.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in this two-parter, it's definitely a two-parter.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I'm writing, I'm like, oh, could this go to 3? But I think that's
Probably.
we probably could. We
Yeah.
could probably talk about mental health all throughout the rest of our episodes ever. But I'm going to really try and hone it down to 2.
Okay, fair.
So we're going to kind of talk about mental health in this part. We're going to talk about the history of how far it's come. And we're going to barely just touch base on the lobotomy treatment.
Okay.
And then in part 2, we're really going to get into those dudes that said, hey, I can do this, who really didn't have any surgical training. So that's more of the med crimey part.
Yes.
So there's no gore in this one. So
That's
if people
okay.
of course it's okay. If people needed a break and just want to like sit back and like learn a little bit and be like, oh my God, they used to do that.
Yeah, mental health through history.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I love that.
So here it is.
I'm so psyched.
So brief stat, 1 in 5 Americans every year suffer with some type of a mental illness. Kate's raising her hand.
I'm raising my hand.
And guess what? I'm putting mine up.
Hey.
So we are 2 of the 1 in 5.
Mm-hmm.
It's so broad, and it can be something so minimal to something as severe as a psychiatric disorder.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, if you're someone that just doesn't like to hear about it, you can this is probably not the episode for you, because we're going to talk about depression, autism, ADHD. So that's kind of, you know, if you had a relationship or a parent with someone with schizophrenia, this might not be the episode for you.
Okay.
That's your trigger warning.
Bam.
So even though we have 1 in 5 Americans, 20%, and it very well could be even more, but at minimum, 20% of Americans experience some sort of a mild mental illness. Many people don't get help, which is why it's probably more. Mental health, thankfully, has evolved. And even though it's evolved so much, there's so much more to go.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we have so much more to go.
There's so much we don't understand, and so many treatments that, and the accessibility to care has so much work to do, because there are just still so many people that just really struggle just to access care. And
I wonder, I for sure, that's the biggest part I think that we struggle with right now, is the ability to get the care that we need. Okay. So many more people might be coming out to say, I have this disorder, I want to seek help, I want to seek counseling. And because we've only really in the last 50 years just really started to treat it in a different way, now it's like, okay, we need more. We need more people to help treat it this way with this amount of population. There's also still this continued fear, that especially in the past when it first started, that people would be treated poorly if they sought treatment. There's a stigma. There was a stigma way back in the history, and the stigma still continues today. You know, we just want to, the science between understanding the brain and personalities and what makes us who we are is still so fairly new. A mental illness, in a broad term, is a wide range of conditions that affect our mood, thinking, and behavior. The most common is clinical depression and anxiety disorder. Clinical depression is characterized by persistently depressed mood or loss of interest in activities, causing significant impairment in daily life. You can't get out of bed, you can't eat, you can't sleep, and you are not able to function the way that you used to. Anxiety disorder is characterized by feelings of worry, anxiety, or fear that are strong enough to interfere with one's daily activities. Those with anxiety or depression may feel symptoms including feeling sad or anxious all the time. Like I said, trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, sleeping too much. They don't want to do activities that they used to find fun. They're eating more or less than usual, don't have an appetite. They think about hurting or killing themselves. They're irritable, restless, easily frustrated, and they feel guilty, helpless, or worthless. You feel any of those at any point in time?
I mean, I feel like most people have moments maybe where they have these feelings, but you know, when you're feeling these things consistently over an extended period of time and it's interfering with your life.
Absolutely. and anxiety. Hi, your girl over here.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm a big old ball.
Of nerves.
It's like I constant wait for the other shoe to drop.
Yes, you were just talking to me about this the other day, how you
Wasn't
just
I?
like envision these horrible things happening and just wait for them to happen.
And a lot of them are fear, but
Mhm.
also irrational to an extent.
Sure.
Right? Isn't
Mhm.
that like, okay, Devon, come on. Like that
Yeah.
could happen.
Yeah. But is it going to? Probably not.
We also have dementia, which many people know about, and it's broad term, a group of thinking and social symptoms that interfere with daily functioning. Many people might not think that that's a mental illness, but more of like a cognitive disorder, but it is classified under the broad umbrella of a mental illness. Bipolar disorder, it's associated with episodes of mood swings ranging from depressive lows to manic highs. ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, a chronic condition including attention deficit, hyperactivity, and impulsiveness. Along with, I think, as we're talking about people trying to seek help, there's a shortage of counseling and places that we can go to get help because so many people are in need. But now we're also starting to see that so many more people are coming out that you can't get the meds that you need.
Yeah, exactly. It's
It's
these
becoming so
shortages.
broad
Yeah.
that now it's like, whoa, we weren't keeping up with, the new demand.
Yeah.
And so many of you on the call might even know that trying to get your medication for some of these disorders is really hard to find.
Be really difficult.
Schizophrenia, a disorder that affects a person's ability to think, feel, and behave clearly. You and I talk about this one on the episodes all the time.
Yes.
Obsessive compulsive disorder, excessive thoughts or obsessions that lead to the repetitive behaviors. Post-traumatic stress disorder, a disorder in which a person has difficulty recovering after experiencing or witnessing a terrifying event. And this one, your girl, I'm telling you, like, it's so interesting. Like, so some people can experience, like, obviously our veterans, right? Broad range of people who experience PTSD for a big significant reason. Someone who might have gone through a single trauma. Some people also like PTSD from a previous way of living, right? And just the other day, I had a moment where I was like, it was split second. Those things, even almost years later, is just like still popping. And it's a form of mild PTSD because your mind automatically goes back to the trauma.
Yep.
A lot of right now is fireworks season. And people have a hard time with that.
Yep, it's very true.
And it's all related to PTSD. And then finally, autism. And this one, I was surprised. I was like, part of mental illness.
But again, it falls under that umbrella.
The giant umbrella. Yeah. And see, these are the things that are most common. So I was like, wow, all of these, they're so big. And we know with autism now, the spectrum is so wide from mild to severe. That's part of people why also with ADHD can't get their meds. And the spectrum is growing so much than the stigma of what it was back in the 1940s.
Yeah, I mean, and think about, how many people actually received, an actual proper diagnosis back in the day before we had any like real treatment for this stuff.
I'd even say like so far as recent as to say the 80s and 90s. You're getting adults diagnosed later in life that we normally now diagnose before the age of 10.
Exactly.
And which is a good thing.
And I'm just hearing this all for the first time, obviously, but when we get into, the treatments that people received back in the day, including the lobotomies, it's because that for a brief time was like a cure-all for mental illness.
And it was the only thing they knew.
And when we say mental illness, we are talking about dementia, autism, depression, ADHD, all of these things that are so different and so specific and much better understood now. But
I think the jarring part of the things that we're going to hear more in part 2 is that as I'm reading a lot of these cases of those that received a lobotomy, I'm reading them and they're describing their behaviors, and I'm like, this is autism.
Mm-hmm.
This is maybe a Down syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
This is ADHD.
Right.
Or this is just normal hyper child
Yeah,
who's going through
exactly.
development. A boy who
Exactly.
doesn't like to sit still.
Sit still,
Hello?
which is normal. Yeah.
Yes.
I have one.
I got 2. So I mentioned that 20%, about 1 in 5 Americans experience the mental illness. About 1 in 20 experience one of the more serious ones as schizophrenia, bipolar, or major depression.
So 1 in 20, that still seems,
It's 5%.
that's a lot still.
It's 5%.
5% of people.
Is it 5%? Yes, it
Yes,
is
it
5%. Wow. Trust
Good
my
job,
math.
Devon. Good
Trust my
job.
math.
All right.
So this is where I kind of get into the history of like the timeline of
Mm-hmm.
when they first started talking about it to where we are now.
Right.
So a lot of the factors that they've started to realize like that could contribute to mental illness was genetics,
Mm-hmm.
physical illness or injury, traumatic life experience, including abuse, and then family histories of mental health disorders and our brain chemistry.
Okay.
In 1840, this lady named Dorothea Dix, she begins her work in Massachusetts. And it's really interesting. Like, there's so much about our New England area,
Mhm.
like, that is so historical.
That's so true.
And mental health is one of them.
Mhm.
Massachusetts, Connecticut, there's so many asylums.
Oh, yeah.
There are so many asylums in this region. And I think it's because, we know in 1776 where our American culture started, and it all started, down south,
Yeah.
and then brought them back up. So all of it really starts like where we live.
Mhm.
And it's like we could just go drive anywhere and see one of the creepy looking
So
old
true.
abandoned buildings.
Yes, you could.
But so she began her work in Massachusetts by becoming informed of the mental health asylums. So in this time period in 1840, those that were mentally ill were being jailed with criminals.
Oh, okay.
So the asylums weren't necessarily separate. They were just putting them in jail with those that had committed a crime.
Oh, perfect.
They were treated as less than human,
Yep.
had no clothing, no light, no heat, no
light?
bathrooms, and often chained.
Oh, my God.
So thankfully for Dorothea, she started really lobbying when she's realizing what's happening with those with mental illness. She starts lobbying, and it's beginning to pave the way to start having state hospitals,
Okay.
to separating them from imprisonment with criminals to a place just for them.
To at least having a place just for them.
Yes.
Got it.
In the 1880s, the expectation that state hospitals for people with mental illnesses will cure them is now being proved unfounded.
Mm-hmm.
So we've gone 40 years of let's now create these state hospitals where they can all be together. And the thought was living a life where they're all together, separate, that they'll just be cured.
Mm-hmm.
They're not having to deal with the daily pressures of daily life.
Right.
That just having a calming environment,
Mm-hmm.
they'll be cured. And obviously they're learning over that 40 years. That's not the case.
God, if that was the case, then our spa trip would have solved a lot of my fucking problems, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little bit more complicated than that.
So at this time, now the state hospitals are starting to become overcrowded. And the priority starts to become custodial care and not humane care.
So it's like this person needs a place to go,
Mm-hmm.
and we're the answer, and
Yes.
we just need to make room for them.
Essentially.
Got
And
it.
so by saying that it's now starting to be custodial care, not humane. So the humane way was putting them in these places away from society. They can be in a calming environment, not have to deal with the daily stressors, and they'll be healed and cured. And then maybe they can go back out to society. That was the humane care.
And also including things like bathing, eating a balanced diet,
Mm-hmm.
a bed, sheets,
Yes.
cleanliness.
Something that criminals don't get.
Uh-huh.
But now it's turning into they're so overcrowded that it's now just purely custodial. How do we just keep them all here?
Just keep them
and
all
how do
here.
we just, keep them from harming and becoming a problem?
So is that where, and you're going to go into it, I'm sure, but it sounds like that might have been the root of the problem and why
Yes.
a lot of the care in these facilities was so atrocious, because the demand was there, but the space wasn't there, and they didn't have the resources
Or the knowledge.
or the laws that,
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
So it really started it in about the late 1800s
Mhm.
to 1900.
Got it.
That's where it really started to be like, okay, what are we going to do to just manage the abundance of people that are now coming to the state hospitals? So in, like I said, 1890, 1900, right around this decade period of time, Americans are starting to turn to eugenics. And basically, eugenics is very similar to Holocaust, Nazi way of living.
I remember
weeding out.
We've talked about eugenics with Josef Mengele, because didn't he study and get a degree in eugenics? Yeah.
And he was using it to do what? He wanted to breed out the Jews.
Yes.
He wanted to get rid of them, make them so that it was no longer, along with other types of characteristics that came along with stigma.
So eugenics, I have a definition if you don't.
Let's bring it on.
Okay.
Participate.
So eugenics is the study of how to arrange reproduction within a human population to increase the occurrence of heritable characteristics regarded as desirable. Like to breed out the quote unquote unreliable or undesirable characteristics, and then keep in the gene pool those quote unquote desirable characteristics.
So this is where it gets really hairy, because now they're trying to weed out the mentally ill, correct them, take that part of that human being away so that they can be desirable and have normal, healthy functioning.
Okay.
In 1896, the Connecticut bars people with epilepsy. They're putting them into the state hospitals. They get banned there. Epilepsy, imbeciles, and the feeble-minded from getting married. So they're now saying, nope,
see.
you have to. You can't get married. You have to stay here. There's like they're starting to strip them of their rights.
Okay, because they don't want them reproducing.
Correct.
Oh God.
In 1907, states begin to mandate sterilization in cases where it is recommended by a board of experts. So again, you now for those that might already be married, we're going to sterilize you so that you cannot further reproduce.
Wow.
Or if you have any of these already, we're going to sterilize you no matter what.
Nice.
65,000 mentally ill people are sterilized, despite the research that became unfounded that sterilization does not stop others from developing illness.
Wow. So how many? I'm sorry.
65,000.
65,000 people were sterilized against their wills.
Yes.
Cute.
So what happened is basically they're like, okay, we're going to sterilize all these people to prevent more mental illness developing from their offspring, from their children. But then they're realizing, oh, wait, this isn't stopping other people from developing it later in their life.
Mental illness has so many factors, and they just did not have the understanding at the time.
Yes. In 1930, this is where we're starting to see treatment options for schizophrenia and other significant ongoing mental illnesses, and they expand with electroconvulsive therapy and surgery. Electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, we're going to touch base a little bit upon. We're mostly going to go focus on surgery.
Yeah.
That's the lobotomy, and we're going to get there. 1940 is, thankfully, President Truman during this decade.
Okay.
So the American government begins to recognize that they have to fully understand mental illness better. Like, no shit. Thank you, American government, 80 years ago for being like, you know what? I feel like we have to understand this a little bit better. This isn't working, what we're doing.
Fair.
So in 1946, President Truman signs the Mental Health Act. And by 1949, a national institute studying mind brain behavior is launched.
Okay.
And here we've come 80
Finally.
years later.
Yes.
So they're finally like, we gotta know what's going on.
We should probably figure out what's happening.
Let's study this before we keep frying people's brains.
Before we keep sterilizing people and.
In 1950s, this is when Americans are like, can we stop putting them in hospitals and start calling for community care?
Yeah.
Let's stop institutionalizing.
Yes.
And let us continue with our lives, but get the care that we need.
Yes.
And look at where we are now. We still can't always get the access. And this is about 75 years later.
Exactly.
Finally, in the 1960s, after decades of protesting, we start to move away from the institutionalism. People are moved out of hospitals and into homes and other care facilities.
Okay.
Medications are starting to come about.
Yay.
Antipsychotic medications are first starting to come about. Thorazine, I think, was the first one.
It was one of the first. And I still see people that are on or have been on Thorazine.
I think I've seen one or two before.
Yeah.
Community-based mental health programs are starting to initiate. This is what happens. So now they're starting to move people out of institutions. Not everybody, but some. Now they're losing funding. They're losing staffing in the institutions, and they still have some people there.
Mm-hmm.
So as the focus is shifting towards, let's give more funds to the community-based programs, more funds to research, they're not getting funds for the asylums themselves. This is leading to poor staff training, burnout, lack of housing, food.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so now they can't feed people that are living in there.
God. Yeah.
And then job training and getting them to know what they're supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was in the 1960s. Fortunately, now mental health has obviously come a long way. We don't have asylums. State governments run psychiatric hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at least every state must have one. I know we have a state hospital in Concord. And the government, it's run by the government.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of oversight. There's a lot of laws. And we can, in most community hospitals, get some short-term help, but not all. I know our local hospital years ago closed the short-term psychiatric unit.
They did.
So it's becoming harder. Again, funding, staffing. Not to say that it wasn't needed.
Mm-hmm. There's a lack of, and doctors, nowadays, not just psychiatry, but primary care and a lot of those like real basic specialties. Providers are not going into that as a field of study anymore because it's not financially feasible.
Mm-hmm.
When you spend that much money on medical school and, all that time in residency, people are like, the only way I'm going to make my money back and actually going to be able to live is if I specialize in something. And so like primary care and all those different facets of primary care, including mental health primary care and outpatient psychiatry, there's just such a limited number of providers.
Mm-hmm.
So sad.
And what I find interesting, we have a new epidemic that's, as they've been saying for years, with drug and alcohol abuse.
Yes.
And so immediately, I know at least for our area, and I've heard certain experiences of wanting to get help, but because you're an alcoholic, you immediately have to go to this program.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be very hard to get into. Again, long waiting list because the Society of Drug and Alcohol Abuse is through the roof.
Yes. And you're forced to self-medicate until you can get help.
But to get help in the meantime for what mental illness, depression, anxiety is causing you to do this.
The underlying cause. Yeah.
They only want to treat the addiction.
Yes.
They only want to treat the addiction and not the whole person.
100%.
And that's, I think, what we're dealing with for many areas.
100%.
So we're going to talk about the asylums a little bit and get into detail. Okay. So we briefly touched upon the time frame of them, but we're going to touch upon the experience inside of them. And
Okay.
it's pretty daunting.
Oh boy.
They were originally designed to be places of sanctuary. That was the point. The
Right.
initial point was this needs to be a sanctuary. And that's not what it was, what it turned out to be.
That's really sad.
So an author of this book that I found called Inside the Closed World of State Mental Hospitals, this author, Christopher Payne, he visited and had photographed 70 different institutions across the U.S. And we can post some of those pictures. It would let you know like what was going on and what they looked like inside.
Wow.
And it really documented how their fall from grace reflects changing attitudes to the mental illness community. But I loved how it was described as this fall from grace, that this is what their intention was, and then this is where they ended.
Absolutely.
And they're kind of now, like, towards the end, they were tend to be thought of as snake pits, hells of chaos and misery, and again, the squalor and brutality. And this is a type of place it became that no one would go to voluntarily.
Oh, wow.
They were not going to voluntarily subject themselves to that environment. It was all mostly involuntary. They had no choice. So, as we said, the concept was born in the mid-1800s. The socially minded citizens, dismayed by the often dismal lot of the mentally unstable, they paid for dozens of the institutions to be made. They wanted these people to be separate from society. And by 1880, 139 was in the U.S. They were all built.
139 asylums.
Yes.
Got it.
The buildings were often described as palatial, made by really prestigious architects. The buildings had all sorts of character. They had vast landscape grounds, lots of impressive vistas.
Okay.
They kind of had like the same like Gothic kind of vibe to them,
Yes.
castle-like.
So on the outside, these looked like these incredible,
Yes. Yes.
properties.
And then not so much on the inside.
Oh, wow.
Their founders hoped that the mentally ill could be cured by providing them with a calming environment, fresh air, a varied diet, exercise, and jobs in the asylums, workshops, or farm, an approach known as moral treatment. So essentially, letting them live, but just in peace.
Sure.
In peace.
The idea sounds
Nice.
okay. Yeah.
Sure. Unfortunately, moral treatment didn't prove to be very effective. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Rather than being cured and leaving, residents tended to remain in the asylum for the duration of their lives, even as more continually came.
Wow.
More and more coming in, and no one's leaving.
Right.
By the end of the 19th century, so again around 1900 on the time period that I described, some asylums had many thousands of residents and had become more like miniature towns. They had a bunch of appropriate utilities and recreational facilities. They could also visit theaters and cafes. And they had beauty salons. So there were so many people that they were like, okay, let's try to make it like a community, have all these things that they could do. And then one of the things that I was like, okay, well, that's kind of cool, but also kind of sad, that they also would care for their residents after their death. They could be buried in the asylum's graveyard, or their remains stored for collection by their next of kin. And I saw this picture, and it was just a whole room. It looked like a big, giant pantry of just urns of those that lived there and had passed. And I was so, like, enamored by this picture because I'm like, how about the families? Like, I know, like, so in this time period, because there was so much stigma, like, sometimes, unfortunately, the loved one they pretended didn't exist. You know, it was like they were almost wiped out of their family
Yeah, they
tree.
were absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
so it's
that's so
really sad.
sad.
And to see those, you know,
That's so sad.
I mean, they kept up the room as best they could. They were all lined up neat, taken care of for, but
Oh,
it was like these are just remains and no one's claiming them.
that's so sad.
So as we talked about, state funding started to dwindle, and then we lost the number of qualified staff. The philanthropist dream began to crumble, with the institutions gradually becoming bywords for squalor, negligence, and often were inept, corrupt, and became run by sadistic
Oh
bureaucrats.
my God, that's so scary.
So, as we said, the moral treatment philosophy was essentially becoming no more. It was dead. It was like, we cannot treat these people this way. It's just not working. So they started to do more invasive therapies, and this one I did not know about. So this was very new to me. Insulin shock therapy. Did you know about this?
I feel like maybe I've read about it, but I don't know a whole
So
lot.
they would use this for an early treatment of schizophrenia.
Oh.
And what they would do is they would essentially put patients into a coma induced by injections of large doses of insulin.
What?
And they would do this every day for weeks.
How did
Right?
these people stay alive?
Exactly.
What?
I mean, how many med crime podcast shows have we done where people were killed by insulin?
Yeah.
So they would give them massive doses of insulin and put them in a coma every single day for weeks
Oh my God.
in hopes that this would change their brain chemistry and lose the mental illness.
Oh my God, that's crazy. The stuff they came up with it was just wild, you know.
In the 1950s, we finally started seeing some medication. That way that we could stop doing so many brutal
invasive
treatments
things.
to people. So Thorazine, it suppressed the symptoms of mental disorders, and it raised hopes that sufferers might be able to live relatively normal lives outside of the asylum. So fortunately, with the first medication, they're like, all right, maybe we can just start giving people these drugs. And a survey that was done in 1948 showed that a quarter of New York state budget was going to the hospitals. And by the mid-1960s, the U.S. government has started to opt out for the community care of the mental ill.
Nice.
Which is what I was saying. More research is going to drugs. More research is going to the community care. And only a quarter of the mental illness budget was going to go to facilities.
Wow. That's wild.
So again, these measures were intended to protect the patient's rights, get more care in the community, and not be in the asylums. But their financial pressures now were so strapped.
They just could not feasibly.
Correct. And then this is where we started to see the institutions decay.
Yeah. So
they have no funds. They can't keep up with the maintenance of the building. The lands and the landscaping that they had around, they were actually starting to sell off their land, and this was hopeful to try and start raising funds. Patients who could not be treated in accordance with the new standards, they released them.
Okay.
So those who remained found themselves directionless, sometimes becoming what we see is the zombies.
Okay.
Because at this point in time, the deinstitutionalism was full swing. They were like, we got to get people out, and all of the institutions were starting to be shut down. So this is where, again, they're just trying to treat people as best they can to get them out by doing lobotomies, Thorazine, high dosage medications, and essentially people were coming out looking like zombies.
Wow, it's so sad.
So then the other thing that they're finding is, even though it was like a rapid closing, we got to get people out, they're like, okay, well, that was a mistake because we started to get the clinics up and running, but we don't have enough.
Nope.
We don't have enough community-based housing. And this was realized in the 90s. So now it's getting more to our current time frame. So even in the 90s, during our childhood, they didn't have enough clinics. They didn't have enough halfway houses to help ease that transition from asylum to community. Like, now what do we do? Now, how do we increase the community help? So this is where we started to learn more about the approach that works more today. And that's the cognitive behavioral therapy. That's where we see a lot of the psychiatrists, psychologists, the counselors to do the cognitive behavioral therapy. And so there was a lot of doctors that were still more than willing to do, and there even is still now, the medication approach, which clearly is needed and does work. More focus was put on the CBT, which is the cognitive behavioral therapy.
Right.
Part that I'm about to go into is really interesting.
Oh boy.
And this person is kind of she's kind of a badass. Back in the beginning, in 1887, a journalist by the name of Nellie Bly, she captured firsthand what the asylums were like by going undercover. So she went undercover at the Blackwell Island Insane Asylum in New York.
I think the story of Nellie Bly is what American Horror Story Asylum was based on.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Because I watched that, and it was Sarah Paulson. Oh, I fucking love Sarah Paulson. Anyway, continue.
Wow.
Yeah.
She's excited.
I am.
So she was committed without much of an examination to determine her sanity. And then she's starting to see that the conditions inside were harsh, cruel, and inhumane. For crying, the nurses beat me with a broom handle and jumped on me. This is what one patient described to Nellie while they were inside. Then they tied my hands and feet and throwing a sheet over my head, twisted it tightly around my throat so I could not scream, and thus put me in a bathtub filled with cold water. They held me under until I gave up every hope and became senseless.
Oh my God.
So this was called hydrotherapy, which proved to be a popular technique. Warm or often cold water allegedly reduced agitation, particularly for those experiencing manic episodes. They were either submerged in a bath for hours at a time, mummified in a wrapped pack, or sprayed with a deluge of shockingly cold water in their showers.
What?
So the asylums also relied heavily on mechanical restraints like straitjackets, manacles, waistcoats, and leather wristlets, sometimes for hours or days at a time. The doctors exclaimed that the restraints kept the patients safe, but asylums filled up, and the use of physical restraints were more as a means of controlling the overcrowded institutions.
Exactly. They just didn't have the time. Restrain him so that I don't have to one-on-one this guy.
At the same time asylums were on the rise, so too was psychiatry, obviously. They got to know how to treat these people that illnesses are more on the rise. A fledgling wing of the medical profession bent on proving their ability to treat as opposed to simply manage the ill.
Right.
And they found that asylums served as the perfect lab for these psychiatric treatments. So now they're testing, they're going to experiment on these people as part of their research.
Yep.
Joseph Mengele?
MK Ultra?
Yep. What is a lobotomy?
Oh boy.
We've mentioned this many times. Here we go.
Ew.
Here we go. A lobotomy or lobotomy is a form of neurosurgical treatment for psychiatric disorder or neurological disorder that involves severing connections in the brain in the prefrontal cortex. The surgery causes most of the connections to and from the prefrontal cortex to be severed. They're cutting them off.
Yep.
So in this prefrontal cortex, this region of our brain is responsible for our everyday decisions, language, memory, socializing, and our spontaneity.
So it's our soul, basically.
It's basically the part of the
a
brain
personality.
who makes us who we are.
Yes.
It
yes.
is the part of the brain that makes Kate Kate and Devon Devon.
I am obsessed with your prefrontal cortex.
Oh, you're so sweet. And this is where we're going to stop.
Oh, Devon, no. I can't.
In part 2, I'm going to talk about 2 of the physicians who got the lobotomy kind of up and running, started evaluating and researching on it, and we're going to talk about some cases of what the lobotomies did to these people.
Okay.
There's your cliffhanger.
Ugh. That was a good cliffhanger because I was just like, all right,
Finally,
here we go.
The lobotomy.
Finally,
the juicy.
lobotomy.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I think it's important, even though I jumbled all over a lot of my words.
No, you're fine.
It's really important to understand the illnesses that they were treating.
Yep.
The illnesses that they were trying to wipe out and what these people were living through at the time that they discovered the lobotomy and how it would work and
wow,
what it was going to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So hopefully it gave you guys a lot of information in prep for the hype of the ice pick to the brain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if I could just offer a little thing, if you or someone you know is struggling with mental health or feels that they need help getting control of their mental health or is in some sort of mental health crisis, you can reach out to SAMHSA's National Helpline, which is a free, confidential, 24/7, 365 treatment, referral, and information service. You can Google SAMHSA, which is SAMHSA, or you can call 1-800-662-HELP.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's important.
And I will link that in the show notes.
Thank you for listening, everybody.
Yes, thank you. We love you so much.
If you want to continue to follow us and help us grow, you can find us on Instagram at MedCrimes Podcast.
You can tweet at us at MedCrimesPC.
I hear Twitter's coming back.
It's coming.
In a new and improved way.
I should hope so.
You can find us on Facebook by searching MedCrimes Podcast.
Or if you wish to become a Patreon, you can join us at www.patreon.com/MedCrimesPodcast.
And you can submit any crazy stories, ideas, anything fun, your break room banter at medcrimes@gmail.com.
We're getting quite a few. We're gearing up for another
Woohoo!
episode. It's going to be great.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Stay safe out there.
Until next time.